Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Crypto Live League. My name is Ken, and today we have the pleasure to welcome back Phil Champagne from Hayek Lab. How are you doing today, Phil?
Hi, Ken. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome, of course. Now, we are going to be doing a series of interview videos with you, so audience, please stay tuned for more to come. And again, if you do not know, Phil is the author of The Book of Satoshi, which is a decentralized collection of clippings regarding the creation of Bitcoin. It also has a Bitcoin white paper in there as well, I believe, and just some really interesting facts about Bitcoin in the early days of Bitcoin. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about Tezos. And Phil, you were actually recently on a pretty popular YouTube channel promoting Tezos and the business that you have, the baking service, the delegation service. So that was with the YouTuber JSnip4, who has over 80,000 subscribers. That's quite impressive that you were able to land the interview on that channel. And you guys discussed sort of the price of Tezos, why it should be a top 5 coin. And also Cliff High had some sort of prediction model that gave Tezos a buy rating. You want to talk a little bit about discussions in that video?
Yes, correct. Yeah. So, it was very interesting conversation because it started somewhere in July or during at the time of the ICO for Tezos. They had something called a mystery coin. CliffHigh has some sort of a web bot mechanism that that's trying to do some mind reading of some sort of projection of what could be the future or something like that. I'm not sure how it works, how valuable it works, but he did make some good, interesting projections. But he also had plenty of false one. Now, what was interesting is when he had that mystery coin where it would be suddenly after the ICO, some sort of issues coming up with it, and but eventually it will be crashing down below the ICO price. But that will be a big buy because then within 2 years after that will be a factor 100 or something like that, a real bargain. So the mention of that was eventually they discovered the issues with Tezos, and they said, oh, look at that. Well, obviously now they saw that everything aligned that this was the mystery coin. But they are just talking about, and it has to be going down below the ICO price. And for that was, 40 cents. It was the price of the ICO in dollars, even though it was priced in Bitcoin. So when they said below the ICO, it was never clear below what price, in Bitcoin or in dollars. And that wasn't one of the topic of the conversation. And obviously the other I tried to talk about the value of Tezos because he was not into Tezos as much. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I forgot to mention is, when I look at the chart, and you might be showing the chart on CoinMarketCap, Tezos is number 18 right now. Cardano is number 9 or 8. EOS is number 5. And this Banker's Coin XRP is number 3. And these are, I'm not sure why we have Cardano other than being traded earlier. But I can only imagine that Tezos should be somewhere between Cardano and EOS within the next year in terms of market cap. And that's the perspective I see. But I totally forgot to mention, to bring up Cardano. Exactly what does Cardano has that Tezos does not have. And from the little bit of what I gather, Tezos has more than Cardano in terms of infrastructure right now. Things are working well. I think you know more than I do.
Yeah.
EOS and Cardano.
Just to speak on where Tezos was, I mean, they had a ZeroNet, BetaNet, AlphaNet, and MainNet. This is all pre-production nets that were running to prove the correctness of the code base, and then they eventually went to the mainnet where we are now and released the tradable token. As far as Cardano went and EOS went, they had a tradable token before their proof of stake network was up and running. I'm not 100% sure on Cardano on that. I do know EOS was like that, where they had the ERC20 token that was just tradable before they even launched their mainnet.
Yeah.
So
and a
those
1
factors
year ICO on top of that. In 1 year.
in 1 year, yeah, they ended up raising over $2 billion. And is it even going to be put to good use? What kind of structure do they have to distribute those funds? Not as clear. So US, maybe it is the case where they were tradable tokens during the bull run of 2017 where Tezos wasn't yet released. So that's the only thing in my mind that puts them higher on the coin market cap, total market cap listing rankings at this time, because Tezos really, from a technology standpoint, is far more decentralized, far more advanced and time tested for their proof of stake protocol that's already been running in the 4 phases that we've seen.
Yeah.
So exactly, I agree with you 100%. It does deserve to be higher in the market cap rankings, possibly in the top 5, and I believe we will see that in the years to come here. As well, transitioning,
because we have a bargain.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at Cliff High's model, I think a lot of people without the model can realize that this coin has the potential to go 100x at this point. And it is interesting that you noted it was below. It had the ICO price at 40 cents US dollar at the time. However, the Bitcoin price was at 20,000 Satoshis.
Yeah.
And it actually did dip below that 20,000 Satoshis, even though it didn't dip below the US dollar equivalency at the time. It did dip to about 18.5 Satoshis per XTZ in the last month or so. So there is buying opportunity. You could have got into Tezos at a lower price in Bitcoin terms than at the ICO price recently. And it's already come back above that. So both USD wise and Bitcoin wise, it's trading at a higher price than it ICO'd at. So we also have some other stuff to go over here in regards to your Hayek Lab delegation service. Recently, you guys have done something quite impressive where you've actually released a dashboard that shows baking cycle breakdown and when you should expect rewards and basically how the inner workings of the delegation service of the Tezos baking reward system work. You want to just touch a little bit on that?
Yes. So this is our first release of the dashboard, and we have other updates coming up in the future. But what I see is the most difficult aspect of Tezos, mostly for outsiders and newcomers, is demystifying all these cycles and the relations with that. And you're talking about a relationship but of 7 cycles difference between the snapshot when the amount of Tez that you have being staking only going to be used for in a baking process 7 cycles later. And that is so much confusing for many. Mostly those people are starting to invest and then it says, gosh, I've been waiting for 15 days now. I haven't received any rewards, that kind of thing. So that's right up front. We're trying to make things a little bit more obvious and more easy to understand with this chart. And that's also the concept what I want to translate also in the book, the chapter 2 and chapter 3, which I completed the first draft, is talking about those things as well. The going in much more details into this process of how it is. And so that chart basically is illustrating, for example, on this, at the time I did that screen capture, where current cycle was 38. And with the color shadings, it's really showing the transition over time and the relationship that these cycles have. And obviously, cycles 39 is actually baking cycle. So every cycles is acting for rotate as the snapshot cycle for the cycle later, but as well as the baking cycles in relations to the snapshot that happened 7 cycles earlier. So it's constantly rotating, which also means that the bakers needs to they have their bond deposit released from 5 cycles earlier, but then they have to apply new bond deposit right up front to replace them. So they're constantly going to be in bond frozen states, replacing, but with new ones. And so that's also covering, the book will cover that, but this is not covering this in details here.
Yeah, so that's a very important point. So again, Phil is curating the book of Tezos, the essentials of Tezos. I don't know if you've come up with the actual name for it yet.
Yeah, I'm starting to look at the Tezos Essentials, subtitle, The Last Blockchain. So
The
that's
last
so
blockchain,
far,
yeah.
yeah. It's a,
And
we're
it,
not claiming that, which is just funny. So
yeah, exactly. I mean,
yeah,
it's a Mars shot, so
it's one guy, I forgot his name on Twitter, that suggested the last blockchain, and I found it funny.
yeah. And
So
it's
that's
important to note. So in chapter 3 of that book, you're going to have a full breakdown of the cycle requirements and links that the rewards will be locked up until the users will actually be able to have them in their wallet. And that's a good question to answer for someone who's new to Tezos, who has maybe heard of baking but isn't quite sure how the reward process works. So what's different from Tezos to, let's say, EOS is the reward is paid in the native asset in Tezos. So if you stake your Tezos, you're able to get the reward in XTZ, the same asset that you're staking. In EOS's case, for example, if you stake your EOS, you're actually not rewarded in EOS token or coin. You're actually rewarded in what's called a RAM. RAM is used as sort of a gas on the side chains within EOS, and each side chain actually can require a different price for RAM to operate bandwidth for your DApp. And they have certain arbitrage mechanisms that should provide some sort of equilibrium of RAM costs within each sidechain as the network matures, with a new sidechain popping up if the RAM cost goes up too high. But with Tezos, it's not too convoluted like that. It's rather simpler. It's just the cycle length of which periods rewards are locked up or which periods bonds are locked up for that is the more complex part. And this chart here does a great job of just explaining that, using the pictures, using the color coordination here and the descriptions to give just a novice user more clearer idea of how reward cycles are broken down.
Yeah, because the obviously delegators, their impact is just the time aspect of this that is their main concern. They're staking, and now it's collecting their rewards. So the bakers, they also have an additional aspect of is the bond requirements, and it's probably something we can cover in a future conversation. Is what will happen with that in terms of the requirements that are actually going up into over time, and so the bound deposit is growing, which it really was low at the beginning, but this is another aspect, and it brings up if the two TES were actually available on the market, those in a bond pool versus those in a KT1 address, they will have a different prices, because one in the bond pool, they're all constantly frozen unless you're pulling out a delegation or shutting down your nodes, basically. So yeah, we can cover that. But what will be interesting to mention in regards to that chart, with the baking cycles, is what I mentioned in the book in chapter 3 is how the process of the baking rights are established, and why it takes a few cycles before you actually see the results. Because as you see on the picture in this example here, cycle 31 is where the snapshot happened for current cycle 38. There is something like 16 snapshot that happens during cycle 31 every 256 blocks. And so you never know which of those 16 snapshot will be the one chosen. So you might be coming in, starting delegation with a baker, but you're in the middle of cycle 31, and you might get lucky because the snapshot selected might be happen right after you actually delegated. So therefore, you'll be accounted for in the snapshot. But if the snapshot selected was just prior to you starting to bake, then you missed a snapshot, and then you'll have to wait for cycle 32, the next one after. Now, how does that happen is that cycle 31 is where there's a process at the same time as the snapshots are taken. You also have a mechanism where all the sets of bakers are generating a random number, and that number is then they generate an hash of that number, and they publish with the commitments to that number. by publishing the hash to that number. So they cannot change that number later. They're generating a purely random number. Everybody's sharing the hash of that number. And in this next cycle, in this example 32, they will then reveal, there'll be the cycle where there's revelation, and that's as the additional transactions in the block. You'll see that as a block, you'll have transaction, your delegation, but you also can have reveal. And reveal is where a baker that did a commitment before in the cycle 31, in cycle 32 will come up and say, here's the number that I had. Here's the proof that the hash that I provided fits. So there is no gimmicks where one will hold his number and then come up with a number that will make it that the combination of all those numbers that are together, brought up, and then hashed together, generate a seed number, an associated number for baking cycle 38 in this case. And that seed is basically generating the baking rights, the snapshot, everything together for that baking cycle. So it's very critical that the random process for establishing baking rights, there's no attacker or some sort that could craft a number that will be making it all the baking rights, basically. And that's the key reason why they have this hash. So they cannot come up with a number looking at everybody's number. I'm going to wait for everybody's publishing their number, and now I'm going to publish mine that I know is going to give me most of the baking rights. So because they are tied up with their hash, they have to stick with it to the original commitment of the number. So that's how it works, and that's why it takes 2 cycles, 31, 32. So at the very end of cycle 32 or beginning of 33 is when the reveal has been completed and all the reveal numbers have been established, and then that's being used to craft the baking rights for cycle 38. So we have cycle 31 establishing what are the snapshots will be, possibly, taking those snapshots and working on the commitments. And it's only at the beginning of 33 that you finally get the details of which snapshot was I included when I started my delegation with the baker. Was I included or not? Was I lucky or not? So you find out about that 2 cycles later.
So that's very important to know. So someone who is new to the process, again, they might go in and delegate to your service at Hayek Lab, and they might say, well, was I included in the snapshot for the cycle that I delegated in? Yeah. It's a slight chance they could not be, depending on what time frame they made a delegation within that cycle. So they won't actually find out until 2 cycles after the fact when this reveal happens. And you've greatly outlined the process here on what happens on the back end to the actual baking node and what sort of details it goes through in order to determine those baking rights. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be, again, it probably won't concern the average user who just wants to delegate to your service, but it's good to know what's actually happening behind the scenes when those bakers are determining rights.
Are interested in details, so that's why it's important to give them the details.
Exactly. And another thing to note, when a user is delegating to a baking service, they can, that's considered staking, right? You can unstake or unbake at any time. It doesn't, you don't need to wait any sort of period before you can have access to your funds and move them to a different delegation service, where I'll compare it again to EOS, where we can show all the downfalls that EOS has that Tezos sort of gives an answer to. With EOS, if you're participating in that staking process to get that RAM, you actually, if you want to unstake, it takes 3 days, 72 hours for you to regain access to those EOS tokens. So that's a huge disadvantage, especially in the crypto market where price fluctuation can happen very drastically within a very short time. So I think traditional financial investment managers will like the fact that they have full control of their assets, with mobility at a moment's notice.
Yeah, and the point that is really funny is it's so fluid, the KT1 address, that as long as you have a KT1 address that you've set up as delegation pointing to a baker, then you're as long as your Tez are in it and you can spend it or receive payments, a merchant can be accepting Tezos, and they will be providing a KT1 address instead of a TC1 address. So at the moment he's getting a payment right up front, they're available for staking. And the same thing for a user who wants to buy a coffee, he's going to use that out of his KT1 address. So people are maximizing the time where things are in a KT1 address so that they are always participating in the staking as much as possible. That's how fluid it is. Obviously, it comes at a cost that you need to have that with the bond. So somebody else has to make the requirements of providing the bond, but you've got a big advantage, and so that's the clear advantage that you mentioned that the US doesn't have.
Yeah, I mean, more efficient process. You can have one, which KT address, for anyone who doesn't know, is an address it's actually a smart contract that's delegation smart contract. So a side note here, I believe Tezos has the most value of its blockchain in smart contracts compared to any other network because of this KT1 address, which is a smart contract to delegate. I believe there's something like 80% of active Tez that are involved in the delegation process. So that's 80% of Tez that are involved in smart contracts, where the value is held in smart contracts. So that just shows you the trust that people are giving to the validity of these smart contracts, the KT1 address.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes, and I'd like to segue into basically the other slide I have with you in terms of the supply growth, BTC, which I have that I've covered in chapter 2. An aspect that I really found very charming about Tezos and how things will be changing our perception of investment in cryptocurrency with a proof of stake as this grows in importance. So far, Bitcoin holders have the only way for them to, as a Bitcoin, I am myself a Bitcoin holder, is to sell your Bitcoin to basically get a capital gain in order to pay for any kind of expense you'd like. Now with Tezos, it's more like an income. You have an income generator that is, and I know that people are coming up with also, well, it's I've seen debates on that over Twitter as well. It's not income because you're paying Tezos. It's actually for fighting the devaluation of Tezos and so on. And that's why I want to show the supply growth on that chart. I have those two charts here. One is the BTC and XTZ supply growth. So we see that over the first 35 years. So starting with year 0 for in the case of Bitcoin was 2009, which will be 30 years next January. And in the case of Tezos was last July. And we see that it's been fixed for Tezos. I mean, slow growth and linear growth, while in the case of Bitcoin, it's a log scale. But it gives us perspective is, okay, well, actually, in terms of growth, it's been faster for Bitcoin for the first 7 years. The interest rate, the inflation rate was above 5.5% for Tezos. And the next slide shows actually the inflation rate, the rate of growth. It was pretty much infinite at the very first few days of Bitcoin's existence. And then around the year, around the year 7, something like that, where we have Bitcoin's inflation rate was about 5.5%, and then it's going down. And so, in terms of for Tezos, and it will be basically 1.88% in 35 years from now. So it actually also goes down because the amount of supply is fixed per blocks. So as the more Bitcoin Tezos exists and Tez, then the inflation rate actually slowly decreases. But
another caveat to add to this is the users that hold Tez, that have stake in the network, can actually vote to change this inflationary rate. So Correct. That's a variable that is sort of unaccounted for. We don't really know what could come of it.
So it's a good caveat to mention. And so we don't know indeed, but we can only guess that it's something like 80% that governance requires something like a very high number of in terms of agreement, and the agreement is based on your Tezos, the Tez number of XTZ that you actually have as a vote. One XTZ, one vote kind of thing. So I expect that whatever is going to be coming up would be overall perceived as valuable to the health of Tezos overall. But the point I want to bring up is just imagine what it would be if Bitcoin was a proof of stake, if Bitcoin was exactly as what you have with Tezos. The thing is, it's been established. People are seeing this as the pillars. Bitcoin, this is the way we need to spend a lot of electricity, because the electricity that we're spending is the proof that we have this strong force in the network. The network is strong, it cannot be attacked and so on. But what if there's actually another viable thing that is working this way with proof of stake, and it is demonstrated that it's also capable of handling any government interference, just as Bitcoin has done so far? The advantage is that we have the amount, we have basically, I have another slide where it's captured from the book. The revenue is then, from perspective of a Tezos holder, you have something like 7% of income per year that you're getting. So if you have 10,000 Tez and it's $100 per Tez, at some point you're getting $70,000 a year. If you were thinking, if somebody was telling you, well, I just have a quick, amazing Bitcoin mining machine where you're not going to spend barely any electricity, it's really an amazing thing, and you just discovered this, that it generates, and that will generate you $70,000, or the equivalent of 7%, whatever Bitcoin that you already have, in additional Bitcoin every year. Everybody will be, wow, this is great. The big difference is instead of going into ASIC, and I have the other slide after that, where these numbers are not exact. I tried to find out what are the costs in terms of revenue, the expenses, in terms of percentage of the revenue. What are the expenses overall that the Bitcoin miner is expecting to face versus the Tezos? So Bitcoin miner, say in this example, 30% is electricity, and the network cost is actually somewhat similar, if barely anything, and it's just like Tezos basically, or maybe a little bit less than Tezos. And the amount of investment in ASIC is, I put up 25%. Again, these are guesstimates. The point these figures want to show is that whatever investment that you're getting at is much less, in terms of profits, is much smaller. Say I put it for 40% here in Bitcoin profit, but it has to be reinvested in ASIC if you want to keep competing, because otherwise the ASIC gets more and more better and better in terms of performance, or in terms of electricity spent versus the amount of capacity. So you have to reinvest your machinery, otherwise you're not going to be able to compete. You're going to spend more electricity to match up in terms of hash rate than somebody else.
Yes.
Well, while in Tezos, you're if you want to make more, well, you invest in Tezos, and that's a very, very different thing. That is, an ecosystem is like, and how much of that goes to electricity feeding hydro China or whatever hydro, pick a country, where a lot of the Bitcoin's revenue that is generated by Bitcoin miners has to go feed the electricity grid, the companies in the energy system, while in Tezos, it's all reinvested into the Tezos holders, actually.
And I think that's a really important point that not a lot of people understand, or maybe people don't want to understand. Mainly, I would say the Bitcoin miners that currently control a majority of the network. They don't want people to know this fact that the profit gained from Bitcoin mining is actually needed to reinvest into the hardware, the ASIC and computer hardware needed to mine, as where with Tezos, the profit needed to reinvest the profit into the actual asset itself, into XTZ, to stay competitive, with peers in the mining process. So with Bitcoin, you're really making rich the manufacturers of these ASIC chips, like companies like NVIDIA and AMD, where they say, during the gold rush in California, don't go out and mine gold, buy the companies that have the picks and shovels. That's exactly true with Bitcoin. If you look at what's happened to NVIDIA stock, AMD stock in the past year, they've gone wildly successful because of the competitors competing for these ASIC chips that are coming out. It's really insane the amount of money that gets put into electricity in ASIC equipment, where you'll see that same process happening in Tezos, except instead of buying into the ASIC equipment, you're rebuying XTZ, or you're putting that profit back into XTZ to increase your stake in the network, which is the equivalency to ASIC mining power of the Bitcoin network. So very important graph there to visualize where the profit flow goes compared from Bitcoin proof of work to Tezos proof of stake.
Yeah. Yeah, I think these are all the things that are going to be developed more in the general mindset of people overall, the investment community as well, is the impact. So far, the institutional money, so far they're interested about Bitcoin, and obviously they see it as a gold-like investment in terms that it does not bring any dividends. It does not bring, it's fixed. It's fixed in supply. Actually, it's even more fixed in supply Bitcoin than gold, because gold, eventually it's much more expensive today to do gold mining, but we have that capacity with the equipment. While the Romans, they had to have something that was the low-hanging fruits because they didn't have the expertise, the machineries at the time. But eventually we can extrapolate that we'll be able to dig gold out of Mars and the moon as well, either robots or whatever. And so you will have always supplies, and in terms of gold, it's just a matter of the energy you're going to have to spend. But Bitcoin is really fixed, so it's really attractive on that level. But it's a fixed amount, and so it's only on the capital gain that you get. Now people is going to realize, wow, instead of feeding up alternative Bitcoins flowing out of the Bitcoin's pool of money, is flowing out of it to the electricity grid, to the electricity companies, as well as the ASIC manufacturers, as you said, is a good portion of the mining profit goes into, not profit, but revenue goes into those fields. So that's very distinctive. And how much is it different for Tezos holders versus Bitcoin holders that suddenly they are passively getting additional Tez and being able to participate in the baking process, mining process easily, and getting more income?
You have the right crypto economic incentives in the Tezos network for the price of XTZ to increase. If you want to increase your share of staking power in the Tezos network, you have to actually go buy more XTZ. If you want to increase your share of the mining power on the Bitcoin network, you actually have to go buy ASIC chips. So it's not aligned correctly in Bitcoin, where it is aligned to the price of XTZ on the Tezos network. So very important to know. And so you said earlier on your example you were giving, if one XTZ equaled $100 and you had $1 million worth, and you're getting somewhere of 7% annualized return through the staking process, the baking process, that made me excited when you said that, because I actually have a similar projection on the price of Tezos where it should be around 100 per, where a roll 10,000 Tez could equal $1 million. And I think we already touched on a little bit of reasons why it should go up that high. one being the economic incentives of power of the staking network. So a lot of people, institutional investors, may want to run staking nodes on the network, and the only way for them to increase power is to actually buy more XTZ. So things of that nature would put upward buy pressure on the price. Do you have anything else, maybe like a headline that you want to just throw out there, and why you think it will go to $100 per XTZ?
So yeah, just to touch back on that, I mentioned that a little bit in the book, chapter 2. Basically, it is somewhat similar, because when people think about investing in a certificate of depreciation in a bank, a CD in a bank, everybody is very aware that whatever interest that you actually get from the bank is at the best matching whatever you're getting from the inflation. So if it's 5% interest that you get and it's 5% inflation, you're just making no income at all. You're not making any money. You're just fighting inflation. And so that's it's been like this for, the value of the dollar has been depreciating so much, and whatever price inflation they actually give is not really the value is much higher in reality. If they accounted inflation as they did in the 70s, it'll be much higher than the figures they are giving us. Now, when you look at Tezos from the perspective of what the gold standard era was, you had dollars, gold coins. You go to the bank, deposit your gold coins, and they give you interest on that. So you earn gold interest like 5% in the bank account for the amount. So remember that during the whole 1800s, the value of a horse, the value of eggs, or whatever, fixed, was retained the same over that whole century in terms of dollars. It was the same amount. Over a life of someone who was born in 1801 and died in 1880, he would have seen a price of horse at $80 all the time, all his life. So now if you account for that on top of that you had the deposit of gold coins in the bank account and it earned you 6% a year, you really see that you are earning 6% every year, truly, because your purchasing power is not eroding. And that's what people is going to start realizing, the equivalency of a gold standard era the deposit earning interest in the bank as what it is with the Tezos staking.
Yeah, that's a very good point, where you have 10 cents could have bought you a loaf of bread back in the 20s. Now look at what 10 cents. You can't even buy a stick of gum. You can't do anything with 10 cents. So you have this massive inflationary aspect to the US dollar, where it's controlled by a central authority, where I'm not even sure they're audited in terms of the money they're printing or the inflationary aspect. I think it's just an estimation, because how are you going to track physical bills that can be destroyed, counterfeited, created by the Fed, if there's no auditing firm like a blockchain that keeps public record of these things? So I definitely believe blockchain is the way of the future.
That's the reason why I call that a fraudulent reserve system.
That's good. I'm going to start using that one. But yeah, Phil, this was really great. We touched on a lot of great stuff today. For everyone watching, make sure to go check out Hayek Lab right on their homepage, hayeklab.com, I believe it is. They have the staking balance of XTZ currently being staked and a staking capacity that shows the room for XTZ that can be delegated to them. So make sure to check that out. And also their new dashboard that they created with all those cool color coordinated features to explain when your rewards will be paid and what cycle you should expect them. So great stuff, Phil. And we also appreciate you going over those slides with us here today. So in the future, we do have some more videos lined up, guys. And we want to give you a little sneak peek of what we may be discussing in the future. And that is the impending bond requirement increase for baking or staking on Tezos. So some weird things may happen when that increases. And Phil, you want to just give a closing statement on that?
Yes, well, it is indeed something that is going to be changing the overall landscape, I should say, of all the baking, the aspect of it, because now the requirements for bond is going to be much more heavy, more difficult, and as we touched back, it is frozen constantly. So that'll be interesting to see. In the very early beginning of Tezos, with the mainnet, not the mainnet, sorry, the BitNet, it was from zero, starting from zero to all the way to 8.25%. That will be the ratio, the bond ratio. So that is growing from over the 6 months. So in next January is when it's going to be full. We had in the beginning not many bakers, so it was a big problem trying to find a baker. But it was actually not that much because even though they will be over delegated, they were not really over delegated because the bond pool requirements were very weak. But as we are approaching that 8.25, the requirements are getting heavier and heavier. So we're going to see that something interesting. So we all have interesting slides I'm going to come up with to discuss about how it's going to imply and what it's going to be implicating.
Right. Hopefully we can avoid disaster where baking delegation services have enough XTZ to actually meet those bond requirements. So very interesting to see what happens. And again, Phil, thank you again for joining us here today. As always, it was our pleasure. And everyone, check out hayeklab.com for your delegation service on Tezos. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Take care.